Cool. So I'm actually going to talk about JAMstack in general, but for clients with that sort of spin on it. So if you guys, we actually had a good conversation in that corner over there. So if like something comes up and you have a question, just feel free to mention it. I'll try to repeat it in the mic. And I'm sure stuff will come up because it's kind of like a broad scope about customers. And I know not everybody deals with customers. Some people work at companies, but I think you can kind of think of customers as everybody. Like Netlify, we have customers, so we're doing JAMstack for clients, so just consider that. And I'm going to cover three main things, which is simplicity, cost, and speed. So if I talk too long, actually I got really excited about this topic, and I have 100 slides. So if it takes forever for me to get to the point, just understand that these are the points. Cool. And speaking of which, I'm just going to talk about something slightly different, but it's going to tie in, so don't worry. So Grandmaster Flash. I really like rap. I like hip hop. I really like hip hop history. I tend to bring it up sometimes for some reason in technical situations. But Grandmaster Flash. Anybody heard of these guys? Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five? Awesome. I was actually a little concerned. I don't know if anybody has heard of this, but I'm a big fan. These guys predate me like 10 years. I'm older, but not really that old. I tell myself I'm not that old. But so Grandmaster Flash, I actually grew up singing these songs, even though they predate me 10 years. So like my favorite one is the song is The Message, which is like not particularly Grandmaster Flash, but one of the Furious Five. Like my brother's doing fast on my mother's TV, so he's watching too much. It's just not healthy. Kids in the daytime, Dallas at night. Anyway, so what was really cool is that when rap came on the scene, it actually came through disco. That's why these guys look like the Village People, because that was around that same era. But as disco was like waning, rap started coming out as this new thing that was happening in urban centers. Particularly, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five came out of the South Bronx area. So, like inner city New York, like rap was really coming up really quickly, and it was like not really understood what was happening. And what was interesting is also a lot of disco is kind of about like the life and going to like Studio 54 and stuff like that, but hip hop came out of like just the neighborhood and what was going on. So it actually was what they called it was a conscious rap is what they called it in the 90s. And so I'll get into that a little bit. But if I talk too long about that, if you want to know more details about Grandmaster Flash in the 70s rap, there's a cool Netflix, I was going to call it a documentary, but it feels like a documentary. It's actually a TV show, and it just got canceled. So unfortunately, I guess I didn't do enough talks about it for people to get excited about it in San Francisco, and I guess no Netflix employees went to my talks. But yeah, it only lasted 2 seasons, but highly recommend it because it's a lot of fun to watch. It's not fun to watch Jaden Smith, though. His acting is horrible. I apologize in advance if you have to sit through that. But let's get down to business. I'm going to talk about business, and I want to talk about a business that is actually down the street from here. So if you go all the way to Embarcadero, there's a restaurant called the Slanted Door. Has anybody ever been to that restaurant? Cool. So overpriced Vietnamese food, that's pretty much kind of sums it up, what the Slanted Door is. You can probably get better Vietnamese food in East Oakland. So like on the Lake Merritt side, it's pretty close. I don't know anywhere else where I would get Tenderloin, yeah, of course. Yeah, get away from the water. Like go in the urban center where the best music and food happens. All right, I'm just going to stop the talk now. You guys, all the gyms are all out now. But yeah, so Slanted Door. I bring this up because I had a coworker at my last job who built this site. Actually, he was an engineer at Ardio. Moment of silence for Ardio. He was an engineer at Ardio, so him and his designer friend that also worked at the same company put together this site, and they pitched it. They were, I guess, I don't know how the connection was, but they pitched it to Slanted Door, and they built it on Ruby on Rails. Which is super awesome because Ruby on Rails is like a great framework to get sites out really quickly. The problem is it's a pretty hefty framework, especially for people who are uninitiated, like kitchen managers. Like you don't expect them to push a dyno in the middle of the dinner rush. It's just not going to happen. So they had to build like all these other tools with this, but they're very proud of it, and they shipped it. And they basically said, hey, we're going to ship this to you. We're just developers. We like doing this for fun. We like your restaurant. Here you go. Pay us some money, and then we'll also keep us on retainer for 6 months in case anything changes. Cool thing about this restaurant is that their menu changes every day. So you have to be able to change their menu every day, and it has to be done by the kitchen manager or whoever, actually, probably the head chef. I don't know who changes it. Maybe they have an admin. I didn't ask that many details. But they have a lot of like CMS type features that they needed. So obviously they built a CMS on Rails. Pretty hefty. Lots of lines of code. Pretty cool. So keep that in mind real quick, because I'm going to talk about the Jam, because what that was not the Jamstack. Ruby on Rails, fully ERB templates, hefty stuff, all custom built, not so cool. I don't really need to like break down the Jam, but I know there's some uninitiated people who aren't familiar with the Jamstack. J, JavaScript, A, APIs, markup, and it's really taking what got really so popular in the early 2000s through like pretty much all the early aughts or whatever, all the aughts, which is like the WordPress, monolithic framework, Ruby on Rails type applications. So Jamstack actually is more of like an abstraction of all those things. So instead of having an entire monolith, you've got microservices and clients that are talking to the browsers, and then you don't actually need to have a running server. You can have a running server, that's totally fine, but you separate that concern away from your client, which is super cool. So like, I know we were talking earlier, Billy, I know you're really into the front end. You're able to just hang out on the front end. And to go over that point really quick, talk about Ruby on Rails, I talked about WordPress. Those are all monolithic architectures. So did anybody's parents ever buy this for them when they were a kid? My mom did. She did it once. She only made the mistake once. I have two other brothers, so like we're like basically a gang, inner city gang. So like if we don't like what we want, like we'll make sure people know. So we're all over 6 foot too. I'm not a big fan of this. This is disgusting. Like if I want the separation of concerns that looks like this. If I want jelly, I want jelly. If I want peanut butter, I want peanut butter. I want to be able to add more client or add more APIs. Like I need that flexibility. And I like that flexibility because I do a lot of side projects. I'm a side coder. I do a lot of hustling. I built a app called Hustling, but that's not the focus of this talk. And what's really cool about this is because if you separate your client or APIs in this sort of structure, you can actually swap out like your client. If you're not really happy with your client, you can actually swap it out, which we did last year at Netlify, which I didn't mention. That's the company I work for. It's also a sponsor of this meetup, if you guys weren't aware. We swapped our client from Angular to React, and it was pretty painful. I joked that it only took 6 weeks to do, 3 weeks to implement, and then 3 weeks to fix. So collectively 6 weeks. Sorry, it's a joke. You guys will get my jokes later. But what's really cool is that we were able to really spread the jam. That's strawberry jam, if you guys weren't aware. But it's nice to be flexible. And I didn't change out the peanut butter, but you can change that out later on. So brief history. Back in the early 90s, or actually mid 80s, when the web was like more of like a real thing, we built HTML. I didn't do it. People built HTML, and that's what I'm talking about, the whole predating thing. Like, I'm in the Grandmaster Flash. I respect it, but I wasn't there for it. So there's like this really, what we're trying to do now is like really focus on what we were built upon, which is HTML. And we just want to build websites. That's pretty much how it goes. And if you guys weren't around that time, HTML is all static files. So you have like an index.html, and you get folders where you have the contacts and the about page. Super cool. And then you have towards the later part of the 90s, we have CSS, we have JavaScript. That came into being. It made it a lot easier to make a lot more dynamic looking websites. Still pretty flexible, awesome. And then this happened. We have all these other like monolithic architectures that we use to build websites, which is great because you can build websites fast. You can hand over a WordPress login, the keys, the credentials, to any sort of restaurant or any sort of end user or any sort of client, and that's great. The only problem is you're keeping it in the hands of that client to maintain that website or find someone to maintain. So going back to the Slanted Door, after 6 months, my previously coworker that built that site was like, hey, I don't do this for a living. I was just doing it for fun. I wanted to build a project to scratch an itch. I want to move on with my life after this. And the biggest problem with the Slanted Door is that, if you guys ever been in a restaurant? Everybody worked at a restaurant? Yeah, everything's on fire in a restaurant at all times. So especially at night when the Slanted Door is like really on prime time. And the problem with them is that they had to answer phone calls in the middle of the night whenever something broke or something had to be updated. So anything outside that touched the CMS, they had to get a phone call to actually update that. And that was pretty annoying to the point where they just stopped answering their phone calls. I think they figured it out because the site's still up. So WordPress, Drupal, Joomla, those are all those icons there. Those are all like monolithic architectures. These are like things that when I talk to, I have a brother that lives in Nashville, and he consults for like web advertising, Facebook ads, whatever. It's all like cutting edge stuff that we're kind of like, we roll eyes to in the Bay Area because that's just a thing that was like 5 years ago. But anyway, it's still much a thing. It's very much a thing out everywhere else besides the Bay Area. Like WordPress is very valid. The only problem is like WordPress takes a lot to manage and keep up. You mentioned it. Sorry, I'm just going to bring up our entire conversation. You had mentioned that you had a friend that launched a website, and they got hacked before they could even launch because they were on WordPress, and someone had got into it. And I know Netlify has had the same issue. Well, we're not even on WordPress, and people attack our website every day, just going to wpadmin.netlify.com just to see there's a vulnerability. Now imagine the Slanted Door. You think they're going to have like the security enthusiasts to make sure that their site, if it was on WordPress, are they going to like make sure they're not vulnerable and they're keeping up with updates? Probably not. So then when their site gets hacked or it gets slower, then they're kind of SOL. So just to reiterate, this is not JAMstack, okay? You guys all get that so far? There's some colorful boxes, stuff to show basically what WordPress and what actually modern websites are doing right now. So you have a database, you have an app server, you have a web server, you have a client. It's a lot to maintain and keep up to date with. Looks a little like this. It's like monolithic architectures, very, very dumbed down. But there's a lot of moving pieces to hand over to a customer or client. And that also is a bin. It's another thing that you have to make sure that your security updates are up to date. You got to make sure you have the latest PHP 7.2 or whatever the latest is, which is, or if you're on Perl, moment of silence. So WordPress. And so this is a transition for Kanye West. I wanted to just bring this up because I can't do a talk without Kanye West. I am a Kanye West apologetic. I'm a big fan, and the reason I'm a big fan is Kanye West, he is probably 5-10 years older than me. He also didn't grow up during the time the Grandmaster Flash started, but it's funny because when he came out in 2004 with the College Dropout, his rap, and before that too, when he was out in Chicago too, doing the underground scene, his rap is very conscious focus. So he actually, when he came on the scene in 2004, he actually changed the entire game. Actually, around the time WordPress was getting really big. He changed the game because he made rap less about being gangster and more about what your life was. So he came out with raps that were about like him not finishing college, him loving his mom, which is like unheard of. Like who talks about their mom besides Tupac, I guess. Tupac has a whole song about that. Should watch the movie. Yeah, so even though Tupac's gangster. Sorry, I'm like contradicting myself while I'm talking out loud. Yeah, so Kanye West, basically, let me get back on the train. Kanye West, he changed the game of rap by taking what was already being done for years, rapping and doing what they called now is called hip hop. Now it's not no longer rap, now it's hip hop because it's quite different because it was a thing that had been doing since the 70s, which is actually rapping. Anyway, I'll get off my stool because I'm going to explain. At that time that Kanye West came out, like rap was all about money and women, and anything else besides actually rapping about your life. And what Kanye West did was made it okay to not be gangster and rap, which is, again, what I'm trying to get at. The JAMstack is making it okay to worry about rendering static instead of actually worrying about how fast and cool your architecture is on the cutting edge of Rails, which is not as cutting edge. Speaking of Rails, so I know we're in the home of the Avocado Toast. You guys like Avocado Toast. I don't know if you guys have like different versions of it, if you ever tried them all. These are all different versions of it. But what's really cool about something as basic as avocado toast, that you can make it completely different by adding bacon or tomatoes or even an egg on there. It's like an entirely different meal. It also doubles the price too when you add stuff to it. It's weird. Breakfast is horrible in this city. It's very pricey. I just paid for breakfast yesterday. It was like, for 3 people, it was like $70. It's insane. Anyway, but you got to do it. You know, it's the Bay Area. But what's cool is that, like, thinking of avocado toast, you have your JAMstack architecture, but now we have this idea of like microservices. So instead of just having your API, which is your peanut butter, you can have like pretzels mixed in there, or you can have like marshmallows, or to make some room, steak. Why not? Who cares? You could actually have a huge difference of like different APIs and mix into your microservices. So if you want to have search, email notifications, if you want to have a user database without a server, it's totally possible. I'll talk about that later. So moving on to today, Matt's right here. Matt actually did this thing with Smashing Magazine. We talk about this a lot, but if you guys aren't uninitiated, Smashing Magazine was built up until very recently on WordPress. Actually, their live site right now is on WordPress, but their new site is actually going to be on the JAMstack architecture. And it was built on Rails, but not only just it was built on Rails, they had their actual news feed on Rails, but then their shop was built in Kirby. The job board was also built in another thing, which I've outlined here. So they had all these different architectures that they had to make sure, they're all monolithic architecture, by the way, that they had to keep consistent across the board. So if there was a design update to one of these, the design update had to move, that code, that CSS had to move to that other repo or the monolithic architecture. So some of it was solved with style guides, but when things get out of sync, it's very, very hairy and very painful. So one thing that Matt actually noticed as we started Netlify and the predecessor, which is BitBloom, is that there's like a trend to taking build tools and actually taking like large applications and using build tools to render things like static. So again, going back to what I originally talked about, HTML, it's getting static files outputted. There's also a really cool thing. If you guys aren't familiar with anybody use static site generators? Cool, big fan. I'm a big fan. Static site generators are really cool because they actually take what is really nice about WordPress and Rails, where you can get a site up and running really quickly, but it does it much better because it takes out all that extra cruft of having a server running. It actually, everything is in a markdown file for the most part. Most of these static site generators are markdown files, but you can actually render things as static, which actually makes it much faster. It's more secure. The cost is much lower when you have a static file to host. And these are markdown files. So it's literally the same screenshot with the different words underneath. But what's really cool about this is that you can really get down to working really quickly. Like there's no more cruft in the way of setting up servers and making sure your updates are up to date for security reasons. And in addition to that, we have continuous integration, which can take those same markdown files and what you normally would rely on a running server for, you can actually hook up in the Travis and Jenkins and Circle to actually do other things besides just run your test. I know a lot of these things, most people think of these like, oh, I need my test to run so that I can deploy to like Heroku or whatever. But you can do a lot of other cool things, which I'll talk about in a moment. So going back to those architecture, instead of having this 4-tier level, now you just basically have a GitHub repo that talks to your client, and there's no more running server that needs to continue to run. And what's great about this, with the CI, you have continuous delivery. So that way, if you make a change in your repo, on someone on one team makes a change to that same repo, that deploys as soon as we can do it. And we have a really cool feature at Netlify. It's a deploy preview. It's a really nice feature. If you guys aren't really using it, I highly recommend connecting your Git repo on Netlify. If you have any like blogs or anything you can test out, try it out because you can actually see the live changes as they happen, which I'll show you live in a moment. So going back to the microservices, like we have all those other random things like the marshmallows and the steak and stuff like that. But now you have an entire realm of microservices that are maintaining things like search and user databases and authentication, all running in tandem with your site. So you can offload a lot of that work horsepower out of a server. And then I mentioned again, continuous delivery. So again, I keep harking on WordPress, but WordPress really is a representation of like anything not JAMstack. So again, with the Rails, isomorphic JavaScript, there's a lot of cruft to get around just trying to make websites. There's no reason to run an entire Rails server just to host a simple restaurant website. It just gets into like all that riffraff. You guys remember riffraff? He had his 15 minutes of fame a couple years ago, and then he didn't literally die off, but he just died off. He just disappeared. So, and it's almost like, again, reiterating back to the gangster culture, like you can pre-package that stuff and share it with everybody, but sometimes it just doesn't work. So finally, we're getting the meat of it. I told you I have 100 slides, so halfway through. Simplicity. What's really cool about simplicity is one thing that we did with Netlify. We have a CMS. If you guys haven't used it, you should try it out. I've got some easy ways for you to try it out today with your phone. But we took what is historically a CMS that is CMS. When you think of CMS, you think of like, again, WordPress. Think of stuff that's pretty hefty. Like you need to have experts to pay $75,000 a year just to keep them a retainer, just to maintain your WordPress site. We took the CMS architecture and we added a new look to it. And that's literally what it looks like. And what's cool about this is that you could take those same static files and attach that, make that your database. And you could obviously do very simple things like make a blog. I know before I even started coding, I know it was like really big for consultants to convince every single marketing site and every single company that they needed a blog for a website because of SEO. So I personally think that's pretty much what really clicked for everybody to do WordPress, because everybody's like, oh, you need a blog so you can have content, and then everybody can show up and like hang out there and write comments, and like it's like a forum, but you write content on a regular basis. Well, yeah, that's great, but now everybody has a WordPress blog and no one's writing content. So it didn't really fit the bill for like things like restaurant. Like, what sort of blog are you gonna write for a restaurant? I guess a food blog. That makes sense, yeah. So what's cool with Netlify, you can actually extend this the CMS. So if you want to make it your own, you can actually make it like this. Everything's pretty much editable. It's open source. So if there's something that you don't like about it, which I doubt, why would you not like it? It's the best thing ever. You can actually just jump in the code and contribute to it. I've actually personally know people who have contributed that don't work for Netlify that have added features to the CMS that fit their bill. So highly recommend checking it out. It's also open source. And again, this is about clients, so let me tell you about a restaurant that we put together. This is a restaurant that literally rips off all the content from the Slanted Door, videos and all, and menu. But what was really interesting is I thought through the idea of like my coworker selling an entire Rails app and then hating himself for having to maintain that for like 6 months. Now this is the same site with a different name, the same pictures and menu. But it's built on the JAMstack architecture, so it's a Hugo template, and it's built on Netlify CMS. So you could actually go and have a menu like on the site that needs to change every day, just like the requirements that the Slanted Door needed. But it's also hooked into a super easy CMS with a backend that's built on Markdown files hosted on GitHub. So right off the bat, whatever he charged, that's a personal question I didn't really ask him about, but whatever he charged for the Slanted Door, which is making like tons of money because they're right in the heart of the Embarcadero on the water, whatever they're charging, he could charge the same amount, but hand them this website. And it's hosted for, pretty much this is hosted for free on Netlify because it's on GitHub. We just hook up with the CI, it works. I can just sit there, and actually, so I'm saying this because I pitched this. I actually spoke at a bootcamp a couple weeks ago. Write this down, Hackingtons. So I spoke at a bootcamp a couple weeks ago, and I basically pitched all the bootcamp students while they're looking for jobs, instead of like door to door, like trying to figure out, oh, let me learn React or Vue and learn how to code. Why don't you build a website and sell it to somebody? Like, why don't you go to like the worst website, like go to that restaurant, build a website while you're sitting there. Like, obviously, you take it home and do the better CSS and stuff like that. But walk to them and be like, hey, this is a website that's built. Please pay me money. And if they don't, just change the name like I did and the menu, and then go to the restaurant next door. So, again, this is super cheap. It's free. I'm hosting this for free on Netlify, and not because I work there, but because it's free for everybody. And I can hand them this website to change the menu every day. And we can worry about the design later or the CSS, which is amazing. But what if you don't need Markdown files? What if you have like an issue where you need like images to change on a regular basis? Like they hired an expensive photographer for $1 million to take pictures of like the sunset, and they need that up there tonight because it shows the shrimp cocktail. Well, this website, and you go to this site right now at tasty.netlify.com, Tasty, I can spell. Tasty.netlify.com, you can see that we have an image and we have a carousel. Again, super basic. Like I literally had my designer throw this together in like half a day. Imagine if I gave him like 2 days. It would look amazing. So I can go through this carousel, look at different images, and you can upload images really quickly, again, through the CMS. Like we're using GitHub as a backend, so you can host images on GitHub. And you're not paying for bandwidth. You're just hosting images. Super awesome. But what about reservations? Like I got to be able to like people to get on. Like anybody try to get a reservation in San Francisco at all? It's insane. So my anniversary is back in January. It's like the first anniversary I had, because I always end up flying back home and getting babysitters. But it's the first anniversary I had in San Francisco. So I'm like, oh, cool. It's a month in advance. Let me get like a cool restaurant like that everybody loves. Yeah, don't do that. It doesn't work. That's why Open Door is a company, because you can't get a reservation at the last minute. Anyway, I'm on a soapbox. Let me get off real quick, because it's not about my problems. It's about customer problems. So Slanted Door wants a reservation system. They don't want to pay Open Door. They just want to have it in-house. They want to be able to see in a database or a spreadsheet or whatnot whenever somebody wants to make a reservation. Then they can follow up with text or email. This could be handled through a running server or FormSpree or whatever very easily. But sometimes, like, who wants to run a PHP server just to take form content? Like, not cool. That's way too much money. Like, they're basically robbing us. This could be handled pretty easily with, now we have a built-in feature at Netlify, which if you go to your form and you add the word Netlify and then you enable forms in the system, we can handle form content. We can actually collect that data for you and do stuff with it. You can also hook it into Zapier or Zapier, whatever they call it, and you can take form data and basically follow up through text or email. You can also set up some automation tools too. I love Lambda. I'm a big fan. There's also OpenWhisk in Azure, where you can actually set up webhooks for whenever somebody submits a form for a reservation, and then send a follow-up email and say, hey, we've got your reservation. We'll follow up with you when you're confirmed. And then when someone actually gets to the spreadsheet, wherever you're populating this data, you can go to the spreadsheet and be like, okay, cool, confirmed for X. Oh, by the way, it got filled. Turns out Kevin Durant's going to be eating at this restaurant tonight too. So looks like the whole thing's booked. Sorry. So you can just do that all through serverless functions, Lambda, Azure, or you can use Netlify Forms. Some other cool things that you can do is authentication. So imagine if you want to lock down your CMS. We actually do, with Netlify CMS, it built-in authentication through GitHub. But there are also some other opportunities or options like Auth0. You can actually set that up. You can set up authentication for basically anything, so any sort of routing you can do. You can lock down certain pages, so if there's something that needs to be hidden, like financial information or whatnot, or just employee-focused things, you can do that as well. And that's really easy. It's all built in with adding a script tag in JavaScript, and then with Auth0, particularly, you can use Auth0 for this. You can actually manage your user database. So if you need to change roles for someone to admin or someone to a client or someone to special guest user, you can do that all in Auth0's backend. I also want to mention, sorry, I'm on another box, but Netlify has a cool open source project that we are welcome any contributions because it's open source. That's backbone of open source, what it is, which is called Go True. We are actively working on this. So we will have more tutorials and content on this soon, but this is basically very similar to Auth0, but a little more lightweight, a little more flexible for you. Commerce. Now I'm kind of getting off the whole Slanted Door thing, so I'm not sure what Slanted Door sells, but maybe t-shirts. But if they wanted to have commerce on their app, there's a cool tool called Snipcart. I spent an entire 45 minutes talking to this team on my podcast, which I'll talk about later. And it's, again, with script tags, JavaScript, you embed the script tag, and you have access to a shopping cart. Now, this is completely unstyled, but you can also style this up to whatever you need to do. And you have commerce. So you now have all these tools. You have these authentication, commerce, form handling, all handled through JAMstack. No running servers, nothing to maintain, and it's all offloaded to somebody else's maintenance. Also want to mention that we do have an open source library called GoCommerce too, if you want to contribute. Tutorials coming. So let's talk about cost. We talked about simplicity, like adding script tags to the bottom of your site. It's really easy. Going to someone's backend, making sure your user table works. That's also pretty straightforward. I mean, most of us we're developers here for the most part. If you're not, this is pretty easy to add a script tag to the bottom of your page. Netlify does have a feature where you can add scripts through the dashboard as well, too. I'm just saying. So cost. How much does this cost? This has got to be like $1 million. Come on, it's like custom. Like it's going to be $1 million. Joke's on you. It costs less. No, it really does cost less. I really mean that because, again, I have my sample site free. It's pretty much free for most things you want to do as a developer, and that's all I'll say about that. Yeah, it's pretty trivial. And there's some other stuff like that with Lambda. Lambda's pretty trivial. Like as many form requests, that's an invocation for Lambda for AWS. You get 1 million of those for free. So you'd have to have 1 million people hit your site before you had to start paying. And for some numbers, I think I forgot. I was talking to somebody and I just went blank. But I think they actually had like a use case where they actually had Lambda functions getting over the 1 million tier every month. And I think their bill was about $5 because even once you pay, you're only paying like 0.0.15 of a cent. per invocation after 1 million. So it's like pretty insanely cheap. You'd have to be doing some pretty heavy output for that to happen. I have another story real quick. I have a friend that lives in Oakland. I live in Oakland. I don't know if I mentioned that. Yeah. Oh, I thought you had a question. I can't answer any questions about Oakland because I'm not on city council, but one day. Anyway, I'm a big fan of Oakland. I have a friend that has a wife who has a studio, a workout studio, one of those gym things or whatever. I work out sometimes. She has a studio and she has a website. And she has a website that she's not a developer, her husband's not a developer, my friend's not a developer, but they need somebody to do this website. And the problem is like they don't know how to code, so they had to find someone else to code. And they just couldn't find, in San Francisco, there's a lot of people that make websites, but there's not a lot of people who you can find for the amount of time and the cost that you want to do to make this website. So it's pretty problematic. They actually paid way too much money when they told me. I think it's embarrassing. I don't want to embarrass them, tell you how much they paid. Paid way too much money for a Wix site. It's insane. Anyway, so they have the site. I mean, it's really cool because they can log in and move stuff and do the WYSIWYG stuff, but they could have did all this stuff for less money. And I just want to point out that a lot of this stuff as developers, like we do have the freedom, like we do get paid very well as developers. If you're a contractor, you can actually get paid probably better than I get paid because you can charge X amount of dollars for whatever. That's really awesome. And you can actually, your costs are actually pretty much like it's all profit at certain points until you need to do some other advanced features. So I'm just mentioning that because there's a lot of people who need websites, but there's a lot of people who can't find something to do a website that's not super janky looking. And this looks great. I mean, I don't think my friend's ever going to listen to this talk, but yeah, it doesn't look that great. It's like there's no custom, like we want to be able to provide an actual nice design. There's like weird like shadowings that's happening on there that looks like 1999. But anyway, it's all right. But let me get off that because it's rude to talk about money. But what I was trying to, so Phil Hawksworth actually spoke at this talk, I think almost a year ago, and he does a talk about static site generation, going all Hollywood. He mentioned the idea, I've stole this from him, outsourcing complexity. So when things get too complex, just outsource it. And what I mean is like don't go overseas and get someone else to write your user database. No, what I mean is like what JAMstack is really cool, if you're implementing search, which we have a very complicated search on our netlify.com. What's really cool is that there's actually entire companies that are built around just search, like Algolia. And that's what I really mean by outsourcing complexity, because Algolia is pretty trivial when it comes to pricing. If you're going to be handing that site to this gym that needs searching for their daily CrossFit routines or whatever kind of gym, I should really know what kind of gym this is because this is my friend. But anyway, when I know I have some CrossFit trainers actually, they want to put out new exercise routines for every morning before you show up in the morning for your boot camp or whatnot. I'm convoluting boot camps and CrossFitting. I know I'm a horrible person, but they shouldn't have to charge all that just for search capability or email notifications. Like you don't even have to build that yourself. You could actually use other tools for that. So again, I'm just trying to point out that you can actually outsource all those tools without the extra cost. And I have some examples for that at the end. I probably should have put in there. I apologize. One other thing is speed too as well. This is not really something that you can really sell customers. Actually, you can really sell customers on this if their site's really slow, but not always realistic. So I wouldn't lead with this if you are trying to sell someone on a site and you're like, oh, look how many milliseconds or nanoseconds you have. Like you don't have. Or look how slow your site is today. Like, not really going to sell them. I wouldn't lead with that. But I do want to point out that there is a cool site to check out to see what your time to first byte is. It's performance.security.net. I stole this from Matt's blog post, but this is what Smashing Magazine looked like before. Just keep in mind, green is good, red is bad. This is what it looked like after they switched to JAMstack. And what really pushes this ahead is the CDN. Like being able to have your site hosted on a network that based if you're on the West Coast or the East Coast of the US, or if you're in India, like you actually get your time to first byte a lot sooner. I won't go into all the details of how that works, but I highly recommend if you have your site on a CDN, it actually improves your time to first byte. So just undertoning, that's what it is. I had a thought that it came up, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Time to first byte is not the only performance metric that always matters. Like there's other things. That's why I have another slide. So there's all these other things like having the latest and greatest, like H2, like making sure your site works. There's this really cool thing, progressive web apps, where you can also make sure that your app works on mobile and on all connections. Whenever I come over the bridge from Oakland, once you get past Treasure Island, like you pretty much lose not cell connection, but data connection. So if you're GPS, it happened to me yesterday. I was actually showing my brother around town. He was in visiting for just a day. And as I would drive through the city, I would just lose connection all the time. I could just always reroute on my GPS. So imagine if you're like just walking around the city trying to find like, looking up for Yelp things and stuff like that. Like if you have to download the entire megabits of data on a slow connection that I always get on T-Mobile, I don't know why, T-Mobile, please help me. You want to make sure that your first download of all the HTML, your time to first byte, all encompasses a really good score. And this is testmysite.io. I probably should have a link back there. But if you want to try out your site, if you go to netlify.com, scroll to the bottom, click the link, and then test your site to see if it works. So some rebuttals. There's some things that like you're probably thinking, wait, hold on, I'm a WordPress dev. If you are, I'm not sure why you're here. But if you are, there's some like rebuttals. Like what about server-side rendering? Server-side rendering, it is only necessary if you're doing a hefty like Angular app. And I can guarantee you that serverless side rendering is probably a better way to go, because when you have on-demand things happening, you can actually do all the stuff at bundle time as well. So I'm actually working on a talk about serverless side rendering. I'm very excited about it because I feel like it's a really cool buzzword. I might change the name in the future. So if you're like, hey, when did that talk come out? It's probably a better name. But with serverless side rendering, you could do all these things on demand. You don't need to have a running server 24/7 and pay dynos. I pick on dynos because what is a dyno? But you could use Heroku is the one that uses dynos. Like they're very expensive dynos, especially if you're a sole developer. It just doesn't make sense. I paid $28 once a month for my blog because I had a video on it, and I didn't know what I was doing. That's very painful, especially when you have a very small blog. But what I'm trying to get at is serverless side rendering. You do stuff through IoT, not as much web, but keep in mind that you can do that. You can handle emails, REST APIs. You can do scheduling. So if you want notifications to be sent to all your customers, clients, reminders, you can do that as well. And then all these other things, as well as having like a user database. Like you don't need to have an entire SQL database just to handle usernames and emails. Like if that's all you're doing, you should probably look at like something like a DynamoDB. Another rebuttal, SEO. Well, I need an entire WordPress server so I can have the best SEO. Probably not, because if you're using JAMstack, it's most likely rendering the static. So if you have HTML, Google can read HTML no problem. So keep that in mind. Also keep in mind if you're using something like a React or Angular, most likely if you have a site that was built in the last year or you're cutting edge, which you should be, come on, it's SF, you're probably using Webpack or Browserify or something like that, where you can actually add in plugins to make sure your site renders a static, so then you can host that static output. Netlify, app.netlify.com is a React app, and we're rendering that statically, hosting on Netlify. So like we're eating our own dog food. So if you have questions about that, see me. I can probably figure out what you're using and probably figure out what sort of Webpack plugins you need to make that work, which is probably just one, which is a static markup plugin. Another rebuttal. A lot of people are not doing this. Well, the truth is a lot of people are doing this already. And we have this cool part of our blog, which is Site of the Week, which kind of showcases a lot of larger companies that are on the JAMstack. They're on the JAMstack because you can't host with Netlify unless you're on the JAMstack. Yeah, sorry, we force you. But there's a company called Mercury based out. They're an agency out there. Sorry, Postlight's the agency, Mercury's the tool. And they have an API that they're hosting with Netlify. And they're using things like Webpack and Babel and all the cutting edge stuff to host their website. And this isn't even San Francisco, they're using cutting edge stuff. Go figure. I mentioned them not only because Site of the Week, but also because they wrote a very recent blog post about money and how they saved a lot of money going serverless and not actually running servers on a regular basis. So if you either Google this super long title or you look up Adam Pash, P-A-S-H, on Medium, his latest blog post is all about how they basically cut their cost on not running servers all the time. I also hinted at this in the middle too as well. I know this came up before the actual talk, but Algolia is a really cool tool for search. So if you have a massive amount of data that you want to search through, maybe you have a lot of markdown files, Algolia will actually do this pretty easily for free if you want to do a little bit of code. If you don't want to write code, they've got this cool tool called Doc Search. So if you have a documentation that you want to be able to crawl and have a search, an easy search, you can do that. You also have Quick Search, which is the same thing as Doc Search, but it's paid. So if you want to have your entire site crawled by Algolia, and they have search that basically updates on the frequency that you want to pay for, so every day or every hour or whatever it is. Quick Search is another word, one to use. So, and again, this is going back to the microservices, like outsourcing complexity to other tools in that microservice realm. One other thing is Spark Post. Spark Post is a really cool serverless email client. So you can actually send emails, you can collect user data. And when I say serverless too, it's a broad term. I know there's a company in the Bay Area called serverless, but it's a broad term to say abstractive servers. So there's servers somewhere, but you don't have to worry about them. So Spark Post will probably most likely not go down because it's AWS that backs that. Aside from a couple months ago when they actually did go down in S3. But anyway, besides the fact that it never happens, Spark Post is handled. It has a server running. It has Lambda functions going, but you don't have to actually worry about them. They built a product on top of that. And same thing about Algolia. Like there's a server happening, but you don't have to worry about it. And that's what I really mean about serverless. So it's just adding serverless to the Jam. It's just taking Jamstack even further. Like all you have to worry about is your front end code when you do Jamstack. I did allude to that I'm a host of the JAMstack Radio. It's a podcast. Super awesome. Please subscribe. I'll wait until you subscribe. Like just open up your podcast feed. I don't see anybody opening their phone. Okay, I'll just trust you that you're going to do it when you go home. Or listen to it on your way home. But JAMstack Radio, we talk about, I've had like at least 2 serverless episodes. I've had some GraphQL episodes. I had an actual episode about Jamstack for clients that we go in way more detail than I just did. Even though this was like 100 slides. We actually do go in more detail. And then one last rebuttal is, isn't this high touch? Is all this stuff you have to manage? And I would say, Chance the Rapper. So, again, we started with Grandmaster Flash, then we got up to Kanye, who basically took what Grandmaster Flash did in the 70s and made it popular again. Now we have people like Chance the Rapper, who are literally Kanye's protege that comes up and comes on tour with them, who is also reiterating what conscious rap is today. So what was old is now new, but it's been around forever. So when I talk about Jamstack, writing HTML code has been around forever. Like people have been doing it. We lost our way when WordPress came around because everybody was like, oh, I don't have to write code. Let me just one-click DreamHost WordPress install, and I'm good, and hand this over to a client, or I can have my blog or my forum working. Like we lost our way when we started adding all this complexity onto our code. It's obviously, we can actually rebuild this and build this into like templates, like Chance the Rapper, who's an awesome rapper. And speaking of templates, I do have templates.netlify.com. It's like my pet project that I've been doing since I've basically been working for Netlify in the past year. I've been putting together like pre-built Jamstack templates. So we do have some use case like we do have a quality template on there that was not built by me. But it's just a regular marketing business template. So if you want to see like what a marketing site would look like and what everything up here is open source, so you can look at the code to see what it took to build that thing. And then we have obviously the restaurant template, and then we have a lot of blog templates as well because that was the easiest thing for me to get up and running. So we have a lot of blog templates, and they're all hooked up to the CMS. Every template up there, so you can follow the README of all these open source projects. And then set them all up, and you have a Jamstack site to play around with. So not exactly like a tutorial, but if you want to get your hands dirty in code today, like you can jump right in there. Speaking of which, if you want to sell restaurant websites, I'm looking for 3 friends. If you guys find 3 friends and then they find 3 friends, we'll make lots of money. So it's just a pyramid scheme I'm trying to put together. Don't tell my bosses that are here. But yeah. So anyway, if you go to bit.ly/tastyeggrolls, you can actually build your own restaurant website and play around with it and create your own web restaurant, or you can go to East Local and like get a taqueria and make them a website and sell it to them for a couple $100 or $1,000, depending on whatever you want. I also want to mention that headlesscms.org is a really cool site. I mentioned a lot about Netlify CMS, which is a headless CMS, but there's some other tools that are out there that you can also check out. Some other things that might fit your bill, like if you want to be able to integrate with, anyway, look at that stuff. There's some other. Sorry, I just went blank because I met somebody who's actually, I know I dogged WordPress the entire time, but I met somebody who's using WordPress's API to make WordPress a headless CMS. I know it's like over engineering the entire problem, and it's sort of like solving the problem, but not. But you could do headless WordPress as well, because WordPress recently released a WordPress API as well. But there's almost every headless CMS out there that could probably fit your bill. So check them out. There's some specific to Jekyll, some that are specific to certain static site generators and situations. There's also a cool one that's GraphQL as well, which is GraphQL CMS. So check that out. So I say all that because I am BWEO on Twitter. If you did not catch up to who I am and what I do, everything's there. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah, so the question is, so a CDN, what's a CDN? It lives in one place? No, yeah, exactly what you kind of rebutted into. It does live multiple places throughout the entire world. So imagine you're vacationing in Denmark, if you happen to be doing that in a couple of weeks, and you want to look at netlify.com. We're not going to serve netlify.com from San Francisco, because why? That's going to take forever. Time first byte's going to get really killed and hammered on that. You can actually serve it from our probably Ireland database. I'm not sure exactly where we have a server, but it actually gets served closer to you, so that way you get a better time to first byte. All this stuff has to go to space, so why does it have to go to space and San Francisco? You can just go to outer Spain. I'm just kidding, that was a bad joke. Any other questions? Maybe a little bit. Yeah. How can developers? Yeah, I would recommend if it's enterprise, more than likely, like I know personally at Netlify, we do have service level agreements, so that can be integrated into whatever you sell them as. Then again, like this is whatever you want to sell them as a entire product, then you can enter that as a negotiation tactic. So, or if you're in a corporation and you have to sell this to your manager or CTO, then you can bring up those things. And most of these companies, like Algolia has an enterprise plan, SparkPost has an enterprise plan, Netlify has an enterprise plan, and they're all built to basically service these needs. So I would recommend probably look at their TOS, terms of service, and check out that to see if it falls in line with what is the use case for that enterprise company. Did that kind of answer your question? Yeah, and so to repeat that in the mic too as well, when you're outsourcing complexity, you're actually handing it to the experts in that situation. So Algolia, hands down, is the best search I've seen my entire time in the web for the past 4 years. Not a long time, but it's better than any search algorithm I can write. So if I'm going to build a product and I'm going to sell it to some sort of company X or B, I'm going to make sure the best is in place. The cool thing about that too is you don't have vendor lock-in. So if you're selling a WordPress package, you're stuck to WordPress plugins. And as we all know, WordPress is always, it's basically riddled with the security vulnerabilities. So if you have a WordPress plugin that does exactly what you need, I'm stealing this from you. You have no idea who built that. It could just be some developer out in the middle of nowhere or in Sri Lanka or whatever that just had scratched an itch, built a cool project. Now everybody's using it, and then he walks away. and this thing's like super vulnerable. Like you're keeping up with your security updates, but then this plugin is all vulnerable. So you're not locked into just WordPress stuff. You're actually the entire world's actually opened up to you. So don't just have to do Algolia. You don't just have to do Auth0. You have the choice of whatever the best technology is at the time. So it opens it up, but it also gives you freedom to also leverage that talent, so that way you can charge more as well. Because like you have an entire team who's VC backed in Algolia that's working day to day on making sure search is like the best thing. Algolia, I love their tagline. They talk about milliseconds matter, and Algolia is really focused on making sure that their search is the fastest, hands down. And I've never seen anything faster than it. Question? Yeah. Yeah, so we basically we are, and I'm speaking for the company up here, but we do have a broad scope of like everybody works with us. We do have opinions, so all of our sites are built on Hugo because we are big fans of Hugo. Hugo.io is actually Go Hugo rather is actually hosted on Netlify. That makes us even bigger fans, but we were big fans before they actually joined Netlify as hosting. Um, It is open source and it has a lot of opinions, but if you have an opinion that you want to see as a feature, we can address those through open source issues. Um, it so actually to answer your question even further, no, it's not opinionated that you don't have to use it with just Hugo. You can use it with Jekyll. You can use it with Middleman. I can tell you right now that since I'm a fan of Hugo, all my templates are Hugo. So it's a one-click solution. It's handed over to you. So like what I've done is pre-built templates to hand over my opinions to people in meetup talks. So that when they click this button at templates.netlify.com, any button you can click, I'll wait, just go ahead. Now you have a Hugo site with all my opinions in there. Did that answer your question?